This is an MPB Think Radio podcast. To hear previous shows, visit mpbonline.org or download the MPB Public Radio app to listen on your iPhone or Android phone on demand.
From MPB Think Radio, this is Mississippi Education Connection. I'm your host, Michelle McAdoo, along with my co-host, Tara Wren, Director of Education here at MPB. Now, for parents with school-age children, the coronavirus has made this back-to-school season anything but routine. And for many students, virtual learning is the default instruction method. So today, we're going to take a look at distance learning in public schools with our guest, John Kraman, Chief Information Officer for the Department of Education, and Ridgeland High School Counselor, Shemeka Hawkins. Plus, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us how you're preparing for distance learning or how it's going so far. Now, the number to call is 1-877-MPB-RING. That's 1-877-672-7464. Good morning, Tara.
Good morning, Michelle. How are you today?
A little rainy, a little wet, but it's Friday.
Thank God it's Friday.
It is. Can you briefly tell us, before we get started with John, how the Education Department is helping teachers, parents, and students with this virtual learning?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say our website has so much information. We have an MPB at Home Learning webpage there at education.mpbonline.org. So we encourage everybody to go there. There are resources for and information for teachers, parents, and students there. In addition, we do have the Digital Education Network, which we've talked about here on the show, which allows teachers to instruct students from a distance. And schools can get involved. They can sign up for that. They can call us about that, and they can learn more about that at our website as well. And then there's the PBS Learning Media, which is a digital learning library with thousands of lessons that support what's being taught in the classroom. And the good thing about it, it is tied to PBS program that's on television. So, for example, if a child watches Peg Plus Cat or a Ken Burns history documentary, there are lessons tied to that teachers don't have to put together. So pbslearningmedia.org has all of those lessons and interactives that's, aligned with state standards and things like that. So that's a great resource for teachers and for parents.
Oh, right.
And then the last thing that we've done is created with MDE, we created a new CEU course for teachers, how to work in a distance learning environment. So I think today is the last day to register for that. Teachers always need CEUs, and this is a great class for this time.
Now, let's talk about that last point you said clearly so people can hear and understand. Of course, teachers need continuing education points, and this is a good way to get those and learn something. So tell them again what that project is about and the last day to register and how can they register.
Well, today is the last day to register. Actually, I think it was yesterday, but since we're on the show today, I'm going to say today is the last day, and hopefully the team won't get me too bad. But it's how to teach in a distance learning environment. That's the name of the course. Teachers who sign up get 3 CEU credits for it, and it'll start in just a few days, and it's 4 weeks long, and they can go at their pace, at their time. And we did work with the Department of Education to create and develop this class, and it was vetted very well. I want to take it myself. It seems like a lot of fun. So we encourage teachers, once they get settled, if it's not this time, we'll offer it again in a few more weeks. So just and they can get to it from our website, education.mpbonline.org.
That is wonderful. Since we all need help, parents, you need to do one for parents. We need help as well. Well, later in the show, we'll discuss what teachers, parents, and students need to know about digital learning, and we'll even have tips for virtual classroom etiquette, which is very, very important, with our guest, high school counselor Shemeka Hawkins. But now let's welcome our first guest to the show, John Kraman, Chief Information Officer for the Department of Education. Good morning, John.
Good morning. How are you doing, Michelle?
Doing fine. And Tara Wren, Director of our Education Department, is here with us as well.
Hi, John.
Good morning.
Well, John, I know you, to say the least, have your hands full in your department since this pandemic hit our country. But before we start talking about how it affected education in Mississippi, tell us a little bit about you and your role with the Department of Education.
Sure. I started at the department in March of 2018. I've been working in the education field since about 20 years ago, and I've been working in state education agencies since 2011, and this is the third agency I've worked for across the country. And my role as a Chief Information Officer is to oversee the Office of Technology and Strategic Services, and it works on helping with technology, data, other processes, analytics of data. We put out our Mississippi Succeeds report card every year, and we are responsible really to make sure that the data that we have is of high quality, that the data we need is obtained, and that we can turn that into useful information and share that with the world while helping the districts work through the mechanical problems of and challenges related to IT and data.
Wow, you have your hands full, like I said at the beginning of the show. When you first started with MD, had your department ever really discussed distance learning in public schools, or were you getting prepared maybe for something like this, or had you not even thought about, okay, shutting of the schools face-to-face and parents and teachers and students will have to do distance learning?
Well, sure. I think that on the one hand, I don't believe anybody anticipated the impact or COVID and its impact on schools. So digital learning, in a way, has always been, in most places or most states, most districts, has been an offering for students who, for whatever circumstances, prefer to work at home, are able to work at home, are comfortable working at home and doing online learning. I know a lot of colleges, for instance, have moved into that direction, and also, of course, companies, have telework policies. So it's been on people's radar for a while, and obviously, the availability of internet and the availability of equipment and software, for instance, is always part of that story. But it was not anticipated that we would be going statewide, as quickly as and abruptly as it happened earlier this year.
So let's go back to March 2020, when the pandemic first hit. How did your department initially respond to the school closings?
Well, obviously, there's a lot that had to happen from within MTE and the state board related to the policies around accountability and assessment, attendance, and so forth. So there was a lot of rapid response on the part of the agency that we were involved in, but most of the work really was from a policy perspective on how to address the framework of accountability and other related policies on the districts because of the impact to make sure that the districts were remaining compliant. In addition to, it was about trying to get information out to schools, to families, on how to respond to being at home suddenly across the state. So a lot of the work really was about immediately addressing the critical needs related to the policy framework around our education system, but also then providing as much useful information as possible to the people who are trying to respond at the local level to the disruption of COVID-19.
Well, John, talk a little bit about how your department was affected. What changes did you have to make then, and what changes are you currently making and adjustments?
Well, sure. Well, if I focus sort of within the Office of Technology and Strategic Services, a lot of the adjustments initially were around the reporting requirements and the accountability requirements that districts face. As I mentioned at the start, we work with districts to make sure that the data are coming to us, are meeting all of their obligations and all of our obligations for reporting, accountability, and so forth. So our initial response was to adjust to what the policy framework and accountability framework around that data relationship that we have with districts. And that's where my team was spending a lot of the early days trying to make sure that we could help the districts understand the impact of the COVID-19 disruption on the work that they did directly with, on the data and technology side. But quickly we started to move into what comes next, because we could not we became very clear pretty soon, very quickly, that this was going to be a continuing disruption to our world, to our lives, to our schools, to our education system. And so we began working at the end of March and into April, and we released at the end of April, on April 24th, a digital learning, distance learning district guidance document that mapped out ways of beginning to break the problem down and to think about the various pieces and questions that needed to move forward from a technology perspective, from a software perspective, from a professional development perspective, and thinking through how to adjust the challenges around teaching in a digital learning environment for students, for their families, for teachers, et cetera. So we began to adjust our thinking pretty quickly away from the immediate impact of COVID toward what does the planning and strategic thinking need to look like to help schools get ready for the new school year. And that was a lot of that work was really done in conjunction with the academic side of the agency and so forth. So there was a lot of different moving parts within MDE to help map that guidance out. And we continue to put out information on a regular basis on how we can support districts and schools and students and teachers to adjust to the new requirements or the new challenges related to COVID in the 2020-21 school year.
Right. And we're going to talk about the Equity in Digital Learning Act in just a little bit, but you talked about that meeting of the minds and coming together and having to figure out what's important, what is needed. What were some of the biggest factors that played in those decisions coming up with this digital learning plan?
Well, if you think about breaking down, and again, this is getting into an area that touches more than just the technology side, but as you begin to think about the experience of education, what it looks like with a teacher and a student in the classroom, and then relocate them to other places where they're not in the same space, thinking about what it begins to look like. How does a student interact with that teacher, and how do we think about any challenges to that, whether it be because of the internet connection is not there, or there's not a device or software working, or there isn't really content available to that student. How do we begin to adjust life in education towards the future state? And so the big considerations really were about, first and foremost, equity. The second one was about quality. And the third was to continue to drive forward with the improvements that we've seen over the last many years. So in the last decade or 7 to 10 years, there's been a massive increase in quality of education as measured by the National Assessment of Education Progress, the National Report Card, or the nation's report card, that Mississippi is the fastest growing state in terms of improvements in 4th grade and 8th grade reading and mathematics. So we were very mindful of the fact, and I believe that Governor Reeves, when he first issued his executive order, shut the school down, said the biggest heartburn about that, or the biggest heartache about that, was the fact that we've been doing so great in improving education for all Mississippi students. Our challenge really was about how to think about keeping that going in the midst of this, of course, unprecedented and unexpected or disruption to our schools.
You're right. Now, before we go to break, I do want to ask you, what were some of the key technical issues that had to be addressed before moving forward with this new school year?
Sure. Well, I think that there's, as I mentioned, there are really 4, maybe 5 key components to this. One is, from a technology perspective, is does the student have an internet connection? And the same is true for the teachers as well, right? And they live at home, in homes that may or may not be readily connected to the internet. So that's the first one. The second one is there a device that you can work on? What are you actually using at home to connect through the internet to school? The third piece is, do you have the software that enables you to manage content? And lastly, do you actually have the content? Those are the technology, I'd say, pieces. And then wrapped around all of that is the fifth element, which is the key around training and support. So how are we helping teachers, as we always do, and as you mentioned earlier on this session that we're in right now, about how do you provide the professional development and training for teachers? That is an ongoing concern in any circumstances. But what is the additional challenge related to professional learning that may really bring teachers and students into a new environment that they're not used to and haven't really been trained on or are comfortable in? So how do we help grow their strength, their capacity, their confidence, and having the raw materials and the other resources they need to be able to effectively teach and effectively learn in digital learning? So those are the big things that we always have to be thinking about. And that's really where the Equity in Digital Learning Act comes into play.
We're going to talk about that act, break it down, and talk about those devices and the distribution of those devices when we get back. If you have a question for John Kraman, Chief Information Officer with the Department of Education, or you have just a tech question about how you're moving forward throughout this digital learning semester, give us a call at 1-877-672-7464. This is Mississippi Education Connection on MPB Think Radio.
No matter if you use an app to start your car or still have a flip phone, Everyday Tech can decipher today's technology for tomorrow's solutions. Subscribe now to the podcast using any podcast app or the MPB Public Media app.
This is an MPB Think Radio podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for listening to MPB Think Radio, Inside Mississippi Education Connection. I'm your host, Michelle McAdoo, along with my co-host, Tara Wren, Director of Education here at MPB. Well, today we're taking a look at distance learning with our guest, John Kraman, Chief Information Officer with the Department of Education. Now, if you have a question or comment for the show, feel free to join the conversation at 1-877-672-7464. Now, John, before the break, we said we were going to come back and talk about the Equity in Distance Learning Act. Can you break that act down and tell us what it entails, and where are you right now with the distribution of devices for the state?
Sure. So the EDLA is an unprecedented piece of legislation. The legislature enacted this law about 6 weeks ago. It became law, and it includes $150 million to help stand up digital learning across the state. And so it walks through a series of priorities to work with the districts to help them get in place a sort of state level procurement support to help them get the best pricing and availability. And it walks through a series of priorities, and it begins with the device, getting the devices into the hands of the students. The second piece is about the software, which is referred to as a learning management system that teachers can use to interact with their students and provide them with materials, resources, gather assignments, and so forth. And then the next piece is about connecting them to the internet. And then it gets into areas around professional development, security, and then it leaves, if there are any additional remaining dollars, to help further the efforts on the part of the districts and schools for the safety and the health of their schools as the facility side of this equation. So the Act, the EDLA, again, lays out how we are going to structure this. And so that, again, passed 6 weeks ago. And we have executed now 2 contracts with Apple and a company called CDWG to provide nearly 180,000 devices across the state to help them on the side of the non-Apple products, and then another 50,000 units to help the districts that are Apple environments. So these programs then stand up a chance for us to tackle a couple things. One of them is, as you can imagine, everyone in the country and everyone in the world that needs a device is now competing for a limited supply chain. So one of the biggest issues is logistics and timeliness. School is starting now, and these devices have yet to be ordered from the individual district side, but we have placed the orders with the manufacturers to make those devices available as soon as possible. So part of what our program is going to do is to look at how to expedite and accelerate the delivery of devices to our schools.
So, John,
the second thing it does...
I'm
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask a follow-up question to something you just said. With school having been started already and the devices have not been ordered, what is the expectation of students and teachers with that delay?
Sure. Well, so there's 2 parts of that. One is, as the law anticipates, the districts are working right now on applications to us to qualify and establish your eligibility to receive reimbursement for the devices. The second thing we did was, as I mentioned, set up contracts with vendors to supply the devices. So once the districts get their approval, and that process is now open for them to submit applications to us for their eligibility, and that window remains open until September 1st, and then they'll have another 10 days to place the orders. So those devices will start rolling in later in September and through the month of October, and possibly, depending on supply chain, maybe at the very beginning of November. So your question is if those devices aren't arriving until next month at the earliest and possibly as late as the end of October, beginning of November, what do schools need to do? And so there are 2 parts of that. One is that there are schools that currently have devices. This is not true across the whole state and not true for all students. But there are schools that have devices, have distributed them or are distributing them to students. The second thing is how, as part of their digital learning plan and anticipating of the restart of school, right, districts have to figure out the accommodation for what are we doing now, and what do we do then when the devices arrive, and then what do we do once the devices are in the students' hands. So this is a complex set of challenges that the districts are working through and the schools are working through now to think through, or at this stage to implement their plans to ensure that education continues just as it did in March and April and May, to make sure that education continues for their students as these new resources are arriving in their schools. And then, of course, then how do you adjust either because of the rise of COVID or the decline of COVID in a particular district or school, as well as then with the arrival of these devices. So how are they adapting? I think the second thing I would say, or the third thing I would say about that is that part of what we're also doing is to stand up professional development for teachers, and we are moving aggressively to get that training. And Tara mentioned earlier at the start of this interview about the resources that you all are making available and the courses that you're making available. We're going to be similarly standing up additional professional development opportunities to help teachers and students and parents adjust to the new software, the new hardware, and the way of delivering instruction through a digital learning program. So those are the pieces that are moving forward now. But it is not an ideal timeline, but it is just part of the challenges that we're, and of course the districts and schools are working through as well.
All right. Well, John, now I know Mississippi Today put out an article yesterday about Cleveland School District and having an issue receiving the laptops because of the Chinese human rights violations. Is that part of the reason of the holdup of the receiving of the devices or purchasing of the devices?
That particular issue does not impact or is not related to our program. As I mentioned before, the law, EDLA, became law 6 weeks ago. And so we've been moving aggressively to design and implement this program, our digital learning program, to implement EDLA. But in the meanwhile, districts have, going back to the beginning of this crisis, have been ordering devices and making other plans and arrangements as they've gone, and they've been doing them as individual districts. One of the challenges that we've seen here at the state level is on this issue of the supply chain. So for districts that have placed orders, again, you cited Cleveland, that according to the article, right, that their devices were caught in customs because of the the human rights issue in China. We are working aggressively with our partners constantly, almost on a daily basis, of talking about supply chain. How do we make sure that we are covering it? How do we make sure that we are preparing to adjust if something gets disrupted? How are we looking for opportunities to find a way to accelerate the arrival of devices? So, for instance, we're working arrangements to ensure that many of the devices that we're getting are being airshipped to the United States rather than shipped on a boat, right? So that's going to speed things up. So the second thing is we're also working with the contractors, the vendors to do, is to ensure that we have logistical support in Mississippi on the ground, so as the devices arrive, we can manage that process here as smoothly as possible. We were hearing from a lot of districts and talking to a lot of districts pretty much on a daily basis about this. And it's interesting to see that if from a district's perspective, they may be able to order 50 devices, 100 devices, 200 devices, and try and get that done. What we're trying to do is do that as a magnitude much higher. So we're ordering hundreds of thousands, trying to make sure that we're supply chain to make sure we're getting all the devices, so that the districts themselves are not challenged with trying to get leverage through a much smaller order that they may individually be placing with the vendors. So we're working on the supply chain. It's a major effort that we're doing, and again, it's an ongoing, continuous effort daily.
So your department is working with each district on the distribution and the ordering of those devices.
Well, right, and also the vendors and then the supply chain partners. So talking to Google, talking to Intel, talking to Microsoft, et cetera, talking directly with Apple to make sure that we're doing everything we can to accelerate Mississippi's order, either by fast-tracking components, as I mentioned, air shipping the devices, and having a smooth logistical implementation here to deploy the devices in the districts once they arrive.
All right. Well, John, you and I were talking earlier this week, and you made a good point. In a normal situation, if you're having technical issues with your computer, you just call your IT department and they walk over to your office. Now that that isn't the case right now, how difficult will it be for teachers and students to troubleshoot technical issues on their own, and how will that affect the learning process? And I'm sorry, part 3 to that is, what's the best course of action for teachers, parents, and students if they're having technical difficulties at home?
Sure. So there's a couple things specifically about the devices that we're being very careful about. Part of the design of the program itself is to think about this very question. What happens if there's a problem with the device, either because it's defective or something doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, or, again, just life happens and devices are either damaged, broken, or lost. So part of the program that we've stood up, again, with the EDLA resources, is how to make sure that the devices are not only arriving, but that they're usable throughout the next 3 school years, and if there's a problem, that there's a minimal disruption to that. So part of the additional cost that is baked into the program relates to a couple things. One is extended warranty for the devices. So if there's a problem with the device, they will be backed up and protected by the manufacturer. The second thing we're doing is we're ensuring that all devices have a robust, what's called accidental damage protection. So if the thing is broken, so the warranty is if there's a problem with the unit itself, and then accidental damage protection covers if there's something that happens to the unit through the experience of that device with the kid in the home. And then the third piece is what is called on-site break fix, which is that within 24 hours for all these devices that we're buying through this program, somebody will be arriving at the school to do two things. One is to take the device to fix it, and secondly is to swap out a replacement unit so the student or the teacher can still continue working. So part of what, again, is part of the cost of this program is to ensure that, especially for districts that have do not have a very strong or a lot of manpower to deal with the technical side of their implementation of this program, that it is fully backed up and provided with a robust support so that, again, there's the least amount of downtime for each student and each teacher, and this is going to be maintained aggressively over the next 3 years so that this doesn't become a program that is strong at the start and then begins to thin out as devices wear out. So we'll be fixing, replacing, repairing devices in a very quick turnaround with very robust support to ensure that all students can continue learning and all teachers can continue teaching.
So, John, it looks like eventually students will have all this technology. We'll be ready within our district, within districts across the state. So what does that mean for the future of K-12 education in Mississippi?
Well, I think it means a lot of different things. And really, there's really a lot of opportunity here. Part of what, and this goes back to even early remarks by Governor Reeves when we first entered into the state of emergency, and that Dr. Wright has talked about often in public settings, including with the board and to districts directly, is how do we leverage this opportunity that this digital environment brings? So suddenly, and we've talked about this a lot over the years, at least the 20 years plus I've been in education, is that your zip code should not determine the quality of education you get. I'm sure you guys have had conversations about that on your show. And it's something that comes up a lot in Mississippi, at least in the 2 years plus that I've been here. And part of that thinking then is with this opportunity is what happens if I can use this digital learning program to strengthen what the schools can offer. So if right now a school does not have, and I believe that Tate Reeves used the example of an AP chemistry teacher, if there simply isn't one available in your school, how do we help the students who are interested in taking AP chemistry find other teachers in teaching other courses in other schools that we can remote into and take that course in the same way as a student would be taking them in their home district. So if you think about then is how to expand the capacity and availability of opportunity to our students. The digital learning, while certainly challenging in its own way because of students now studying at home, the positive side of that is that there's an opportunity for these students to take advantage of anything that's offered anywhere in the state and beyond. And so part of what our goal will be is to not only to get the devices into the students' hands, to help the teachers grow in their capacity, but also leverage this virtual environment that is now available to all students in the state of Mississippi as these devices come online, is to then open the world to them and offer them every possibility of finding the best classes, the best teachers, the best experiences, the best supplemental resources that will make the education for all of our students, wherever they live, whatever school they're enrolled in, the best chance to learn going into the future.
You're right. All right. Well, John, before we get out of here with you, the Department of Education's website provides learning at home resources for districts. Has your department provided any technical at home resources that teachers or parents can use on your website?
Yes, I believe that there are several different pages, and part of it, not from a technical perspective in terms of the website, obviously can't provide information about getting the device per se, but we're certainly sharing information about how to approach the technical challenges related to digital learning, and they are there for the schools and for the home, for parents. So yes, there are resources there, and as we begin to stand up this program and provide more opportunity for interaction between us, our partners, and the districts to work this through, that we're going to be increasingly and continuously putting up and updating information to help on the technical side, especially with the rollout and implementation of the EDLA.
Well, John Kraman, MDE's Chief Information Officer, thank you so much for spending your morning with us today here at Mississippi Education Connection. We hope and pray that this school year will start off on a good note and those devices do get to Mississippi and get in the hands of the students that need them.
Yes, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for being here today with us. Well, it's time for us to take another break, and when we return, we'll welcome our next guest to the show, Ridgeland High School counselor Shemeka Hawkins. Now, if your child is distance learning this fall, or will be, give us a call and tell us about your experience. The number is 1-877-672-7464. Stay tuned. This is Mississippi Education Connection on MPB Think Radio.
Hi, I'm Nancy Lottridge Anderson, the host of Money Talks and president of New Perspectives. I'd like to wish MPB a happy 50th anniversary.
Hi, I'm Walt Grayson. You can now listen to the wild, weird, and wonderful stories of Mississippi with Mile Marker.
The first question that we get when someone comes in is, how is the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library in Mississippi?
Join me as we hit the roads of Mississippi on Mile Marker.
We have every letter Grant ever wrote and every letter ever written to him.
You can listen by going to mpbonline.org/radio or by using your favorite podcasting app, Mile Marker, a Mississippi Roads podcast.
This is an MPB Think Radio podcast.
This is Mississippi Education Connection on MPB Think Radio. I'm your host, Michelle McAdoo, along with my co-host, Tara Wren, Director of Education here at MPB. Well, today we're discussing distance learning, what you should know. Now, before the break, we spoke with John Kraman, Chief Information Officer with the Department of Education. Now, if you have a question or comment, give us a call at 1-877-672-7464. Well, as school districts move to online learning, many teachers, parents, and students may never have attended an online class or even an academic discussion with others. Let's bring in our next guest now to discuss what teachers, parents, and students need to know about conducting and attending virtual classrooms. Let's welcome our guest, Shemeka Hawkins. Good morning, Shameka.
Good morning.
Thank you for spending a little time with us today. I know you're getting prepared, or are you in the middle of school right now?
We are preparing for our students.
Okay, good deal. Well, before we get started about, of course, the do's and don'ts and how students and teachers and parents should act in virtual classrooms, tell us a little bit about you and your years in education.
First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to join the conversation this morning. It's my pleasure to be here. I have 23 years in education. I earned a bachelor's degree in biology from Alcorn State University. And after graduating from college, I took a year off for service through AmeriCorps. And it was during that time that I really developed a love for education. So I served as a middle school science and gifted teacher for 9 years. Then later I went on to obtain my master's degree in guidance and counseling from Jackson State University. And so this year will begin my 14th year as a school counselor. I am a national certified counselor and a national certified school counselor.
Wow. So you have a lot of experience in education. And could you ever imagine school in Mississippi looking like this?
Never. Never could have imagined.
I know. If you were listening, we were talking to John. He is over the entire technical department for the state of Mississippi. And, of course, they never imagined having to move to distance learning as well. So let's take us back to March when the schools first closed. As a counselor and an educator, what were your first thoughts?
Well, for one, I knew we were entering uncharted territory. and I knew that it was a time to be innovative and creative, to implement some strategies for our students to be fully prepared for what was ahead.
And how did your school in particular adjust to the forced transition of distance learning? Because I'm sure it wasn't easy.
I think we all adjusted really well. Everybody just jumped in and did what was necessary. Mr. John mentioned about the technology and in some instances the inequity. And so we were able, we are a one-to-one school, so most students had devices. The only issue is that some students, and not just in our school, but in all schools, there's an issue with Wi-Fi or internet access. And so with our school and district as well, jumped in with packets of information for the students who did not have that access. So we all just band together and did what was necessary for our students.
Well, what was some of the things you learned during that first semester we had to shut the schools down as a counselor?
As a counselor, I realized that, it's important to be flexible, and it's important to understand the need to reach every aspect of the student, because with school not necessarily being in, we're used to seeing our students and being able to look at them and see when they were having a not so good day and be able to help them. And then the teachers were there to be able to, let us know if there was issues that needed to be addressed. And so we had to find ways to reach them through email and through different other platforms to just make sure socially and emotionally they were well. Academically, they were good. The teachers were doing what was necessary to help them be successful, but we had to implement some other things to make sure emotionally that they were okay.
Well, Shameka, we know that the teachers have gone through lots of training, professional development, and that's continuing. What type of training have you and other counselors gone through for this particular time?
Well, I think in some sense, we've been preparing for this in essence. We have district meetings throughout the state. Every school district has meetings with counselor supervisors, and we meet and we talk about the tools and the things that are necessary for students. The only difference is we just had to move it to a digital platform. So we were still reaching out to our students. We were still, contacting them statewide through emails, through their parents, checking in with their parents, all of those things.
Right. So what has your district decided to do as far as their reopening plan?
For our reopening plan, we are, students do have the option of virtual as well as face-to-face, and those details are on our website.
Okay, so can they do hybrid as well? Is that an option?
No, just virtual or
face-to-face. All right. So at this time, I don't know when you guys open, but do you know how many students per se will be online and or in the classroom?
Not at this time.
All right. And you're a high school counselor, so you work with a particular grade level or all of the students?
We service our students alphabetically, so we have the privilege of working with them in grades 9 through 12 so that we have an opportunity to, see their growth and be with them those 4 years.
Oh.
So, Shameka, this question is about preparation. This is for high school students. They're preparing, particularly the seniors, they're preparing to go to out into the work world or go to higher education. How do you see this impacting this year, being done virtually for a big piece of the year probably? How do you see that affecting the support that you provide for them?
I really don't see it having a major impact just because we will just have to transition and move our services for those that are virtual. Some students will be seeing face-to-face, but even those that are virtual, We have software that we can meet with the parents and students. We still plan to offer like the informational parent meetings. It will just be virtual. So we will still have those opportunities. Also, we typically have college fairs, but those will be going to a virtual format. We're in the process of planning what that would look like. So students will still have access to those things. We just have to do it in a different fashion.
Right. So what are some of the things that parents should do if their child will be attending school virtually? Let's start with the parents first.
With the parents. Okay. With the parents, I think the most important thing is to maintain structure and set expectations with your child. And when I say maintaining structure, develop some type of schedule. For some school districts, a schedule has already been prepared where students know what time they're to log on to particular classes. There may be some school districts where the expectation is to get the work complete and you devise your own schedule. So I would just say make sure if there is not a schedule in place, create one or follow the one that's been presented. Also minimize the distractions in the home. Make sure that your child has a quiet place to work on the assignments and also to be present during the live classes. Also have some expectations. We know we're in a digital age and our students love their phones and the different apps. And so set some expectations with that as to, when they can and cannot have that. I would also say monitor your child's academic progress. Know what format your district has for reviewing your child's grades and make sure that you're, consistent in checking in on that. And I would also suggest identifying some supplemental resources. Of course, the teachers are always available. Utilize their emails. A lot of teachers have office hours where they're not actually teaching at that time. They may be, reviewing grade papers or something of that nature. And so that's a good time to reach out to your child's teacher if you're needing additional assistance, but also locate some resources or some apps that could be beneficial to help reinforce some concepts that maybe your child is struggling with. So those are just some of the things that I would say for parents.
Now, I have to go back to a few points you made. I want to start off with, you're talking about a perfect world where a mom or dad or a single mom can actually do all of this. And I understand that this is the time we're living in, and this is the plate that we've been given. And for some parents, this is doable. But for some parents, this may be very, very challenging to minimize distractions or stay in contact with the teachers and develop a strategic plan when either the parent has to be on the assembly line at 7 a.m. and gets off at, 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and the child has to zoom in and be in the classroom all day. What type of support would you say the education is giving parents that really can't do those things?
I think that for one, as the parents, particularly those that are working in that situation, it says it takes a village. So I think that that is the time when you reach out to your village and, the community, if you're involved in church. I know some churches are getting involved with that, particularly for parents who have issues with having to work and not being present. Reaching out to maybe some college students to assist in that. And also in terms of, maintaining a schedule, parents can implement some reward systems for those students. If you're logging in and you're completing your assignments at the end of the week, maybe there's something that they've been looking forward to that you can reward them and make them start learning to become accountable for their education.
I like that. I really like that. And you just gave me a tip. My daughter is a junior, and she's doing completely digital learning classroom. We have to talk about this etiquette in classroom, virtual classroom etiquette, and things that parents, teachers, and the students should and should not do. But before we do that, can you tell me a few things that students should know about virtual learning?
Absolutely. For students, definitely it's important to set some personal goals and not just generic, just saying, I want to make all A's this year. No, set a time frame, be specific about it, and make sure it's something attainable that you can do. So set some personal goals. I would also say, which is really important, is just stay focused and stay positive. This is new. Although we experienced this in the spring, I think with there are different expectations with this now, and I say that you be positive, that it will look different, and that you will, be able to accomplish that and what you set out to accomplish. I think that's really important, and just being positive. But also I want to say, ask for help if you need help. That is so important, because, the teacher is not in a physical room with you to read your facial expressions, or to see that you're just, not actively involved. They need the assistance as well for you to reach out to them and just say, hey, Ms. Jones, I'm struggling with this concept during your office hours. Would you mind, assisting me? And I guarantee you they'll be more than willing to help.
And Shemeka, you said a lot, and we're going to talk about those distance learning etiquette tips. But one of those things you said was reaching out, not being afraid to speak up. If you're falling behind, if you're not understanding the concept, ask. And I noticed a lot of, especially high school students, they're doing this for the first time this way, because Jackson Public School, when you said a schedule, they have a strict schedule. Log in by 9:25 for homeroom. If it's after that, you're late. And each class, just like you're walking in the hall of the classroom, you're going to each class. They have a lunch break from 12:30, and they start back up at 1:05. And you feel like you're in school. You're just not in the hallway. These students are not used to that. And when you say speaking up and I'm falling behind or I need to ask a question, tell us about some of the tips and etiquette that these students need to know about virtual classrooms.
Glad you asked that question. The very first thing I would say, the first tip would be dress for success. There's a temptation. You're at home. You just got out of bed. You want to just get to class with your pajamas on. You want to be comfortable. But we want to dress appropriately, avoiding distractions. And you want to get up, comb your hair, brush your hair, do all the things that you would do if you were attending school traditionally. You want to feel and you want to look the part. So dress for success is a really good one. And I would say the next thing would be on time. My grandfather used to say, if you're early, then you're on time. But if you're on time, then you're actually late. So I encourage you to wake up early and log on a few minutes if possible so that you're ready to start class. We kind of touched on a minute ago about being in a quiet place. As much as possible, just check your surroundings. Make sure it's a place that's not distracting for you. You also, students, want to be prepared. Make sure your computer is fully charged, that your camera's on and ready, your workstation is equipped with all of your materials. Make sure that, you have some headphones beside you if you need to put those in, because you may not be in a position where you don't have to use them.
You're right. Well, Shameka, I'm sorry. I don't want to cut you off, but I don't want to run out of time before we just kind of get the bullet points of some of these tips that we will post on our podcast at mpbonline.org. So if you want to get these tips again, you can, but mute yourself. That's a very, very important one. Make sure you mute your computer or your device while the teacher is talking, and so everyone can hear what's going on in your house. How important, and actively participate. Tuesday, when I was sitting with my daughter during her virtual day, the teacher was asking questions and no one said anything. She said, how is everyone doing? And let's talk. What you want to know about me? And everyone was just silent. The teacher is there to help you guys, and she can't have a classroom if no one responds. That's very important, isn't it?
It's very important.
And I like how you said be Be prepared. Have your laptop and your tools and supplies that you need before you log in. Treat this just like you're going to school. If you go to school, you're going to have your backpack with all of your supplies you need. So just because you're at home in your bed, I want the students to understand that treat this and maybe visualize you getting up and going to the classroom.
Absolutely.
Now, in our last few minutes, what is some advice for teachers, students, and parents and other counselors that you can give right now?
I would say give grace. Give grace to yourself. Parents, give grace to your children. Just give grace overall. And I want to, we've addressed students and parents. I just want to say to teachers, first off, everyone was thrust into distance learning in the spring, but it looks completely different now with the onset of opportunities for training. There are additional expectations. And so it can have a tendency to feel overwhelming. But I think one thing that can help curb that anxiety is being really familiar with the software, the platform that you're using. And that'll help build some confidence for you as well. And I also want to say this, teachers, it is very important that build rapport with the students. And it is kind of hard digitally, but it's possible. So start the lesson, not necessarily with content, but just checking in on the students, just seeing how they're doing. And if you notice something, please reach out to your school counselor. We are there to assist in any way possible.
Thank you so much for those tips. I learned a lot today as a parent with a student going to digital school. Plus, I'm sure a lot of people listening learned a lot today as well. Thank you again, Shemeka Hawkins, for spending a little time with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And you have a great school year.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, we've come to the end of another great show. We want to thank you for listening and, of course, thank our guest, Department of Education Chief Information Officer John Kraman and Ridgeland High School Counselor Shemeka Hawkins for joining us today. This program is a production of MPB Think Radio in conjunction with MPB's Education Department and the Mississippi Department of Education. For Tara Wren, I'm Michelle McAdoo. Stay tuned for Southern Remedy for Women and join us next Friday right here at 10 a.m. on MPB Think Radio.